All right, hello everybody. We are going to get a big complicated project going here, and I'm going to give you a lot of the code to get you started with it, but I'm going to give it to you little by little. So before we get to the code, the first thing that you're going to need is to have XAMPP installed on your computer. So you can just do a search for XAMPP download. That's what I did here, and you should find the download link right here, and it should take you to a page that looks like this. And then you can install probably the latest version. So it looks like this bottom one right here is 8.2.12. So you can just go ahead and click download to download the installer. And by the way, this is for Windows. If you're using a Mac, then we may have some issues. You'll have to talk to me about it. Okay, but anyways, go ahead and download XAMPP and install it. All you have to do after you click on this link to download the installer, you just double click on it and you can follow the defaults the whole way through. So I think we've done this in class once before in Web3, but you can just follow the prompts, just all the defaults. Now at one point you might see a funny error message about some UAC account thingy. You can just hit OK and ignore that. But other than that, it's just a pretty straightforward install, and you're going to need that for this project. Once you get XAMPP installed, you'll need to open up the control panel right here, and you'll need to start the Apache server and the MySQL server. I've already got them started, but you would these two buttons would say start. If they weren't already started, you want to click both of those buttons to get it started. Now, if you can't find the control panel right here, it's in, let me see if I can find it here. It's going to be, I got to pull this over here. It's going to be, it should be on your C drive. And then there should be a folder called XAMPP right here. So you want to go to your C drive, XAMPP, and then here's everything for the XAMPP installation. And then there should be a file right here called XAMPP-control.exe. If you double click on that, it'll bring up this control panel right here. And if you use this a lot, you can actually pin that exe file to your taskbar so that you've always got it handy. Here's mine right down here. Okay, once you've got XAMPP installed and the Apache web server started and the MySQL database server started, then you should be able to open up a new browser tab and go to this URL right here. So it's localhost/phpMyAdmin, and then actually make sure you get that / on the end right there, because I've noticed that if you don't get that trailing / right after where it says admin, sometimes it thinks you're trying to do a Google search instead of actually going to your localhost phpMyAdmin server. Okay, anyways, here we go. If you're here and you can see your phpMyAdmin, then you're all set and ready to move forward. You can see I've got quite a few databases here already. We're going to add a few more for this project. And now the next thing that you're going to want to do is download the repository files that I gave you. It's the Web4 Final Project repository, and I should have given you this either in class or a link to it somewhere. Now here's what it looks like. Now I want to show you something here. I've got my terminal set up here. I want to show you all the branches that I created here. So if you do a git branch command, look at all these branches. So there's a whole bunch of them. So what I'm gonna have you do is we're just gonna start with the first branch, and then I'm gonna have you look at the code and get familiar with the code, and probably we're gonna talk about the code, and then once we're comfortable with the first branch, we'll move on to the next branch. So I tried to sequence these in steps, and then I kind of broke them up into substeps. You can see that for step 2, there's a part A, B, and C in here. Okay, what we want to do to get started right now is we want to check out the first branch right there. So to do that command, I'm going to scroll down here. I have to press Q to get back to the terminal here. So I just hit Q, and now I'm back to the terminal. And to check out that first branch, which is called 1-starter-files, you do this command: git checkout, and then the name of the branch. So 1-starter. Oh, wait, is it 01 or just, yeah, I think it's 1-starter-files. Okay, and now you can see here it says that it's switched to that branch, and that's where we want to be. So this has got the initial setup for the project. Now, this is a really important step for us to understand these files before moving on. So anyways, I'm going to walk you through these files right now. Actually, before that, I want to show you something here. Go ahead and open up this dev notes folder, just like that, and you should see a file called database.sql. Click on that right here, and now this is actually got all the create statements for actually 2 databases. So you can see it starts off here with create database project X. When I was putting this together, I wasn't sure what we were going to call this, and actually you're going to turn it into your own project. So I just called the database project X. So that's what we're going to go with here. So, and now I did comment out some other things along the way, like in the SQL here, you can see the lines that start with the hashtag or comment. So I was fiddling with some things along the way, but I commented out those lines ultimately. Down here, you can see that it creates another database called Project X Test. Okay, now that's going to be for our unit tests. At this point, I'm not sure if you've completed the unit testing assignments that I've given you, but if not, you will soon. And then we're going to create a separate database just to run our unit tests. Okay, again, I commented out a few more lines. I was fumbling around with Docker, trying to put all this in Docker containers, and in the end I decided that it's getting a little too complicated. So I did comment out a few more lines. Okay, what I want you to do here is go ahead and select all. So do Control A and then Control C to copy it to your clipboard. And then what I want you to do is go back over to phpMyAdmin. So here we are back in phpMyAdmin, and click on this link to the server here. So if you click on that link, it's just going to show you all the databases, or it's just make sure you click on the link here. We want to make sure we run it from the server here. So if you're in any of your databases, we want to get out of there. So just go ahead and click on the server link at the top. Okay, and then go to the SQL tab right here. And then this is where we can run those queries that we copied to the clipboard. So go ahead and do Control V to paste those in there. It's a whole bunch of stuff. We'll be talking about this a lot more here. And so everybody's going to start out with these tables, a users table and a user roles table. And that's because what you're going to be building is a multi-user application. So we need to keep track of different users and authenticate different users. So anyways, hopefully you'll understand all the SQL queries in here from your database class. You'll see that at the very end I do have an update statement that's commented out right now, and what that does is it's going to encrypt all the passwords in the users table, and don't worry about that, but at some point we will be uncommenting that update statement, but leave it commented out for now. Okay, to run the query you have to scroll down a bit and find the Go button. Go ahead and press that. Hopefully everything will work here. Now you might see some errors in the log here. I'm seeing an error or two here, but what I do have here is those 2 databases that are created. Okay, now sometimes you have to refresh the view over here in the left nav, so you might have to click that refresh button right there. But what you should have are 2 databases, and the way it's kind of funny how phpMyAdmin organizes these. You might have to drill down a bit into the project and then this X folder, but you should find your 2 databases right here. Okay, so hopefully you got your databases set up, and then now we can get back to the code. Okay, so back here in VS Code, now I've already got the Node modules folder installed. You can see it right here. You won't have it installed right away, so you're going to have to run the npm install command from the terminal here, and make sure you run that command from the Web4 final project folder. So I don't need to run this because I've already got it installed, but you'll want to do that, npm install. And then the other thing that you're going to want is to go ahead and do that, and you can pause the video if you need to wait for it to install. But the other thing that you need to have installed, if you don't already, is NodeMon. So you can go ahead and install that npm install NodeMon. Okay, and if you remember, we use this, and by the way, add the -G there to install that globally. If you don't remember what NodeMon is, it's just something that allows us to start the server, and then it'll automatically restart the server anytime we save our changes, so that we don't have to manually stop and start the server all the time. Okay, the next file that I want you to take a look at is the package.json file. I want to show you these here, and what I want to show you are the scripts. So, well, first of all, here's the dependencies that we have installed right here. We're going to be working with environment variables, so we installed .env. I gave you an assignment about that. We're going to be using Express here, and also to connect to our SQL server, MySQL database, we're using this package, MySQL2. Hopefully we played around with that in class a little bit, so you're a little bit familiar with it. And then I do have some dev dependencies in this section here. So remember that dev dependencies are ones that you only need during development, and you don't use on your production server at all. We're going to be using the CLI version of .env, and I'll show you that in just a minute right here. We're going to be using Jest to test our to run our unit tests. You can see here I've got NodeMon, so it looks like I might have installed NodeMon just into this project, but anyways, it's okay if you don't see NodeMon and you have it installed globally, that's okay. And then finally, the other dev package that we installed is the SuperTest one, and what that allows us to do is to write unit tests using Jest that will allow us to do HTTP requests in our unit tests. So that's how we're going to test this. Our project here is a REST API that responds to HTTP requests. So to test those, we need to make HTTP requests and make sure that they return what's expected. And SuperTest is the package that's going to help us do that. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in just a minute here. Okay, now go ahead and scroll up to the script section. Okay, so look we've got a few scripts here. I'll start with this bottom one right here. So that we have a script named dev. So what that means, to execute the script, we can, in the terminal, we can do npm run dev, because that's the name of this script right here. Now what that does is that's going to launch our app using NodeMon. You can see NodeMon's in there, and it's also going to tell it which env file to use. So we're going to use the dev version of our env file, which is up here, and I'll show you these env files in just a minute here. But when we're running our development environment, we want it to use that file. So to make that work, now this .env right here, we can do that because of the .env CLI package that we installed. But anyways, we just start our command off with .env, and then -e is the option that allows you to specify which env file you use, which is this .env.dev. And then after that, we start our app with NodeMon, and you'll see here's the path to our app, which is server.js. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. If not, let's talk about it in class. I'm going to jump up over to the test script here. So if we run npm run test, then it's actually going to run this whole command right here. And now we're going to be using a different env file for that, because remember, we're going to run our unit tests against a different database. So this env file, this one, which is right there, is points to the test database that we set up a moment ago. Okay, then to run the Jest commands, we do npx jest, and then we're going to point it towards the test folder. So that's what that part is right here. And it's going to run all the files inside that folder that end with a certain extension. And hopefully you've completed the Jest homework assignment that I gave you too. Okay, now I did run into a weird error where the Jest tests weren't completing. They weren't actually ending. And that got a little messy because we were doing a lot of asynchronous calls because we're doing HTTP requests. So I did a lot of research. Actually, I fumbled around for many weeks to figure this out. But what I had to do is I had to force the Jest tests to complete. So there's a little hack, but you'll see what I mean later, hopefully. But that was a little trick that it took me a long time to figure that one out. Okay, here, we installed the Jest package, and so we can add a Jest property to our JSON.package file just like this. And what this allows us to do is to configure the way the Jest test runs. So what I needed to do is, here's what we're going to do. Now, every time we run our unit tests, we are going to wipe out the test database and then recreate it from scratch. By doing that, we're going to have a consistent database. Every time we run our unit tests, we're going to recreate the database so we know exactly what's in it, so that we can run our unit tests and know that they're predictable. If we didn't do this, then we might have failing tests because the database, may change throughout the course of your development. And when we run our unit tests, we want to know exactly what's in the database. So what I did here is you can, in the Jest object, you can add that property, the global setup, and you can point it towards a JavaScript file that's going to get executed right before you run your unit tests. And so if we look in this file, we'll see, let's take a look at what it does right here. So I'm going to go over to, that's in the test folder. So here we go, and that's setup test database.js. Okay, so here it is. It's just a JavaScript module, and it's importing the file system, and I'll show you why in a second. And then the other thing it's doing is it's importing our database module so that it can connect to the database. We'll take a look at that. Maybe I better take a look at that right now first. But we do have, let's see, that would be, where is that? That's in the source folder. Okay, so this little module right here is how we connect to the database. So we're making sure that we can use the .env files right there. We're importing the MySQL2 package, and now there's two versions of it. One allows us to use promises, so we want to be able to use promises, so that's where we're importing that version of the MySQL2 package. Okay, and then what we do to create our connection to the database is we call that function right there from our MySQL package. Okay, and then what we have to pass into that create pool method is how our connection is going to work. So you don't really need to worry about most of these variables, or some of these variables I should say, but look at, these are all coming from our env files. So these here, we're referring to variables in the env files. So here this tells it which database to use. For dev, it's going to be localhost, and then it's going to be using the root account for dev. The password is just, I believe it's just going to be an empty string on the dev environment, but on the live environment it would be something else. And then here is going to be an environment variable that specifies the database name, and then the database port, and there's a few other things in here that you don't really need to worry about right now. Okay. Anyways, that's the module that creates a connection to our database right here. I'm going to jump back to our setup test database script right down here in the test folder. Okay, so here we go. Like I said, we're using the file system. We're going to do some read operations, and I'll show you that in a second. Then here's the module we were just talking about that gives us a connection to the database right here. And then what's going to happen here is it's going to run this function right here to set everything up. Okay, so here, this is going to be the function that gets executed every time we start our Jest tests. Okay, now what it's going to do here is it's going to get a connection to the database that's coming from the DB module that I just showed you. Again, we can talk about this in class if you have any questions. Then the next thing it's going to do is it's going to read this SQL file. That's why we needed to import the FS module, because we're going to read that SQL file, and that has all the create statements for our test database. We can take a look at that in a second, but it's right here in the same place as the script. So we'll look at that in just a second here. It's going to run all the queries in it on that line right there, and then it's going to release the connection back to the pool. And then what's going to happen when that's done is it's going to start to run our unit tests. Okay, go ahead and let's go down to that SQL file right below the one we're looking at right now. It's right here. Okay, here it is. This is going to drop our test database. It's going to completely wipe it out, and then it's going to recreate it and then it's going to recreate all the tables. Okay, so here's all the insert statements right here. And so we're going to run that every time we run our unit tests, and that's going to guarantee that our database is exactly the same every time we run our unit tests. Okay, I realize this is a lot, and I imagine you're gonna have lots of questions when we get together and talk about this in class, and that's okay. And I just want to show you here, I actually created a little sample file so I could show you how we can run our tests here. Actually, I have two little sample files right here. This is the easier one. But anyways, I have a utility module that I included in here. Let's take a look at the utility module right here. So that's this one in the source folder, utils.js. It doesn't have much in it. All it's doing is it's exporting one single function called validate email address. Now, we've used this function before in JavaScript. It just returns true or false based on whether the parameter is a valid email address. Okay, so it's using a regular expression here, and then here's the line that'll return true or false when it tests our regular expression against the email parameter. Okay, so we do have this module. You could add other utility functions to this as you see fit. I just put this one in here because we're going to be using it a little bit later, and I wanted to create a little test for it too here. So let's go back down to the test folder and find the tests for that module. So hopefully you know by now that Jest requires the files to be called to have a .test extension, or I'm sorry, a .test.js extension. Okay, so there's the tests for the utils module up here. So here you can see, hopefully this code looks a little bit familiar to you from the homework assignment that you did with Jest. And here we're importing the module that we want to test. And then here, here's the describe that covers the whole module. So that's called the utils test. And then nested inside of there, we have another describe for our validate email address. So that starts here, and if you follow that line down, you can see that that's where it ends. So it looks like we're just running two tests here just to see if the thing is working here. So the first test is going to check to see if it returns what we expect it to when the email address is valid. So I ran these two tests right here. Hopefully, if you pass in those strings right there and right there, you'd expect it to return true. So those are where we're tests where we expect it to return true. And then here, down here on line 14 and 15 are tests where we expect it to return false, because look at this, those are not valid email addresses. So those tests we expect to return false in order for the test to pass. Okay. Maybe what I'll do right now is I'll run the test so we can see these here, but yeah, let's try that real quick here. If I go down to the terminal, and remember what we can do to run the test is do npm run test, and that'll run that test script that's in our package.json file. Let's see if these pass here right now. Okay. Now look at that. A lot of stuff happened right there. First of all, it ran our setup script, this one right here, which wiped out the database and recreated the database with that SQL file. So that's why it took a while for the test to run, because it had to wipe out the database and recreate it. We'll be writing unit tests against the database soon here. Okay, and then it looks like all the tests are passing. And so there's actually two test suites. What it's referring to is the utils test. That's the one that we were just talking about. And then I have another one here that I can show you how it works. And this is to show you how we can make HTTP requests, so that we can test to make sure that our responses are what we expect them to be. Why don't we talk about that real quick here too? But that was the other test suite that ran. So we have a test suite for the utils module, and then we have another test suite just so you can see how the API tests work. The API tests are the ones where we're making HTTP requests. Okay, so we'll talk about so those are the two test suites right there. Between those test suites, there was a total of 4 tests altogether, and it looks like they all passed. Okay, we will talk about the API tests in just a second here. I just want to show you another thing that you may not have seen before. Right here we have, take a look at the server.js file. Okay, what this does is it sets up .env so we can use environment variables, and then it imports our app. So this code right here, the code that's in this module right here, we can take a look at that in just a second. But we normally put all of our app code right here in this code that actually starts the server. Okay, now there's a couple of reasons why I deviated from that right now. What we're doing is, let's bounce over to the app.js right here. So this is the module that sets up the Express app and defines all of our routes. So you can see I've got a home page route set up there. But what you're not seeing here is that it's not starting the server down at the bottom like we normally do. I've got some error handling set up, and you watched a video about that, so you should know how that works. And instead of starting the app down here, we're exporting it, okay? So we're exporting it, and then over here in server.js is where we're importing it right there, and this has the code to start the server, okay? So whenever we want to start the server on the dev environment, this is the file that's going to start it. But when we run our unit tests, you'll see that it starts the server on its own. So I had to separate this out so that our app code was separate and the code that started the app was in a different file. And that's because when we go back over to the API tests file right here, it's going to start the app. We just give it the app and it starts a server on its own. Okay. Okay, so that takes us to our API test file right here. We import .env, so we're going to be using environment variables. And remember, the specific env file that we're using is determined in the package.json file. So just we talked about that, and we can talk about it more if you want to in class. Okay, here we're importing the super test package, which is going to allow us to do tests that make HTTP requests. And then here's where we're importing our app. That's the same one that we were just looking at. And then what we do here is once we import our app, we give it to the super test by calling the agent method on it. Okay, so underneath the hood, it's going to start the app for us, and that's why I needed to separate the code out. Normally we put the app code and the code to start the app in the same file, but the super test agent is going to start it in the background somehow so that it can run the unit tests for us. Okay, now once it does start the app in the background, it gives us what we call an agent. So you can think of this as this is like a client that's going to make HTTP requests. So that agent right there is it's acting as an agent on our behalf to make HTTP requests. Okay, let's take a real quick look at some of the tests right in here. Okay, I'm going to go down to right here is our first test, and we'll run this and I'll show you how this is working right now. But this is testing our default route. I did put like a very simple hello world default route in here, and then what's going on here is we want to do a get request through our agent. So we call that right there, and that returns a promise, so we have to use await. So you can see that what we pass in is the route that we want to test. Okay, and then here we check to see what we're expecting and what we got. So right here, if the response, so it's going to return some response object that has all the details of the response coming back from the server. That's going to have a status property, which is going to be an HTTP status code, and we expect that to be 200. That means it's a successful request. Okay, we also expect the body of the response to have this message in it, and I'll show you what I mean in a second here. Okay, now we did run the tests already, and they're passing. But what I didn't do is I didn't actually start the development server so you can see how all this works right here. So I'm going to go down to the terminal right here, and to start the dev server, we want to do npm run dev, okay? And then So now, oh, it looks like port 888 is already in use here, so I'm going to have to kill whatever's running on port 888. Hang on a second here. Okay, I had the app running in this other terminal here, but that's why I was having that port conflict right there. Okay, so to run the dev server, we do npm run dev, and then hopefully it'll tell us that the server is up and running. And again, we're using nodemon here so that it's going to restart the server for us every time we save a change to a file. You can see the server is running on port 8888. So I'm going to go on over to a browser right here. I'm opening up a new tab, and we're going to go to localhost port 8888. So we'll go to localhost colon 8888. So that's going to be a request to the home route. It's doing a GET request, and here's the object that it's responding with. So it's responding with a JSON string, and then the super test, I believe that it assumes that you're working with JSON in the body of not only the response but the request. But there's what we're returning here from our home route. Now let's go take a look at this route in the app.js file. So if we go back over here to app.js, here it is. So okay, so there's the route that we set up in Express. I was doing some testing against the database right here, so you can just ignore that commented out code. But there's where we're sending the JSON response right there. That's what we just saw in the browser window. Okay, one last thing I want to show you real quick here are the different env files that we're going to use here. So here they are. Here's the one that we're going to use in production.env. So these are the variables that are going to be in play right here. Now, so at this time, we don't know what to set these to because we're not at the point where we're ready to go live yet. So I just put like X's in here for a lot of these at the moment. Okay, let's take a look at the dev one right here. So you can see right here, it's running on, we're going to run the app on that port. It's going to use that environment variable. We're using phpMyAdmin, so we're pointing to localhost. When you install phpMyAdmin on Windows, it's going to create a root account that has no password. Now that's a major security problem to not have a password, but remember XAMPP is just for development. So we use a root account with no password. There's the name of the database that we're going to be connecting to when we run in dev. And then, I mean, you don't have to really worry about these other ones here. So yeah, now let's take a look at the test one real quick here. Only difference here, there's two differences right here. Remember when we're running our unit tests, we're working with that test database. So this is the one that gets wiped out and recreated. So that's the database that we're dealing with when we run our tests. Now the other thing that I want to show you right here is if you looked in the other env files, you would see that that variable is set to false. Normally you don't want to allow multiple statements to run all at once, but for the test environment we wanted to do that because that allows us to run all those SQL queries that blast the database and recreate it. Normally that can be a problem. You just want to run one statement at a time, but since we're running a whole bunch of them when we recreate the database, I had to set that value to true in our environment variables. Okay, this is a lot. This is probably information overload, I get it. We're going to hopefully talk about this a lot, and you can ask me questions or you can ask your GitHub Copilot questions you want about this code. But it is important to kind of start to understand it before we move on to the next step because this is the foundation here for our whole project.